It is finally here, and it's obviously a Stephen King adaptation. It is directed by Andy Muschietti. Now, in the past, I did create a video conveying all of my skepticisms regarding the It trailer. And I believe in that video, too, I kind of go into other skepticisms that I had with this film's production history because, to be quite honest, this film doesn't have the best production history at all. It was originally supposed to be written and directed by Cary Fukunaga, and then his entire script and job kind of got trashed because the production companies weren't quite fond of his vision of the film. So what they decided to do was kick Cary Fukunaga out to the curb, and they kept all the elements from his script that they thought were good, and then they brought in these generic writers to come and fill in the gaps that they wanted to fill in. One guy who's never wrote anything in his entire life, and one guy who is the writer of Annabelle. So I think all of my criticisms and skepticisms going into this film were fairly warranted. So all in all, I didn't want to shit on this movie throughout its campaign. I wanted to root for this movie, but unfortunately I was criticizing it all the way through just because of all those reasons that I just said. So the big question here is, was it disappointing or was it enjoyable? Well, the answer is yes to both. It really was disappointing to me in a lot of different ways. But it is somewhat enjoyable to a certain extent. This is not a terrible movie by any stretch of the imagination. But look, I really thought I was gonna have to sit here in front of the camera and eat my words and eat some humble pie because all of my friends were really digging this movie. All the critics are really digging this movie. This film has like a freaking 90% right now on Rotten Tomatoes. And I really thought I was gonna have to sit here and say that I was wrong, but I would rather do that. I would rather go and see a good movie and come and sit in front of the camera and say, oh, I was wrong, than having to sit through a disappointing film and come here to say that I was right, because I don't want to be right. I wanted to be wrong because I want to see a good movie. But unfortunately, to my unpleasant surprise, despite all the great reviews that it's gotten, I still found this film to be fairly disappointing in my opinion. Somewhat enjoyable still, but disappointing overall. First, I'll talk about the positives, because if I start talking about the negatives, it's just going to be this endless train of fuckery that probably won't end for a while. But I'd like to note that before I get into any criticisms of the movie, or even my positives of the movie, I'm simply judging this as a standalone horror film. Every criticism that I have has nothing to do with the adaptation. It has to do with the novel. I'm not judging this from any adaptation standpoint. I'm literally just judging this. How was the film? How does the film work cinematically? All that good stuff. So if you're looking for a guy who's trying to judge this from an adaptation standpoint, I'm not your guy. You might want to find somebody else for that, because I am unfamiliar with the novel. So yeah, there's that. So the positives to this film. What were things that I thought were done well? What were things that I liked? Well, I thought most of the kid characters were acted well and were fleshed out somewhat well. The kid characters were actually fine. There were at least 2 or 3 kid characters that had some sort of meaningful arc to them, and I could tell that there was effort put into the writing for their characters and attempts to flesh them out and give them some sort of substance. That was present in the film, so that was at least done somewhat well. Wasn't perfect, but I'll get into that, a little bit later. Other positives, the sound design was pretty good. There's a lot of different scenes in this film where the scene probably wouldn't have worked at all if it wasn't for the creative use of sound design. The girl character in this movie, named, I forgot, played by some actress name I do not know, I'm sorry. She was great in it. I thought her acting ability was pretty good. Same goes for the lead character, I think his name's Billy, the guy who has a stutter. I thought he was pretty good. Not perfect, but at least good enough for the film. The kid with the glasses was funny. Every time he opened his mouth, he would say something rather hilarious. And overall, the movie is kind of fun, despite all the bad things I'm probably going to say about it in a second. Even with all that taken into account, I found it to be somewhat of a fun movie. It wasn't like a bore fest. You could definitely see this with your friends and probably have fun. So there's that. Bill Skarsgård as Pennywise wasn't that bad. He was decent in the role. He was pretty convincing here and there in certain parts. Okay, that's enough of the positives. I'm done trying to find things that I liked about this film because there's honestly probably more things that I disliked about it than I liked about it. So let's start with the negatives. I guess the first negative I'll address has to do with its pace, tone, and structure. I understand that this is a fairly large book. It's like 1,000 pages, and the first 500 pages are just the kids. So obviously, this film's probably going to be somewhat rushed because you can't fit 500 pages in an hour and 40-minute movie and expect it to be paced well. But regardless, it still does suffer from pace and tone issues throughout the movie. Pretty much throughout this entire film, things will happen and stop and then happen and then stop and then happen and then stop again. And it's pretty repetitive to the point where it gets fairly annoying. Like, for instance, the kids will be like in the scene in the trailer where you see the projector slider thing with the pictures start going crazy and all the kids start flipping out. That scene leads to like a big like jump scare, big crazy haunting moment. But right after that, they're all outside and they're all just kind of like talking as if they just didn't experience something extremely horrific. And it's kind of like that throughout this film. Like, it's just choppy. Like, the whole thing is choppy. Scary thing happens, and then back to normal program. Scary thing happens, back to normal program. Like, there's no lingering sense of dread throughout this movie. There's no consistent, excuse me, there's no consistent tone of dread that lingers throughout this film. You just kind of feel like you're watching a series of scary things happen, but with no real flowable connection between them. Again, there's not a consistent tone, and for another example, I guess this is gonna maybe get into some spoilers, but whatever. I mean, I think most people have already seen the movie by now, but if you don't want to hear this shit, spoiler alert for a few seconds, whatever. There's a point in the movie where there's this rock fight scene where it's against like the bullies and the kids, and they're like just throwing rocks at each other, having this like rock fight, and the tone of that was just like out of place, like out of nowhere. Like, we're watching this horror film where there's a freaking psycho evil supernatural clown that's killing children, and then there's this rock fight scene between the bullies and the kids, and it's accompanied by like this upbeat like rock-ish music, and I don't know, and then like it's done, and then they move on and it's on to the next thing, and it's just a random tone. Like, everything about this film's tone is just choppy and feels like comes out of left field, and there's no consistency throughout the entire film. I know a lot of fans of the book are going to say, well, I liked it because that stuff was in the book and the film was able to portray it in the way that I imagined it, and all that stuff's in the book, so it's pretty accurate to me. Like I get it. I'm sure that this film is very much like the book. I'm sure that this film doesn't derail much from the book. It doesn't change much from the book. I'm not sure. I mean, maybe some of you in the comments later can help me out with that, because I really don't know much about the book. But even if it was exactly like the book, some things work better in literature than they do cinematically. Some things don't cinematically work in the way that it was written in the novel. They don't. They're two different art forms. Some things don't translate well. To be quite honest, if I was in charge of adapting this source material, I would have probably changed quite a bit of things, because I feel like changing some of the things that were in the novel would have made for a better horror film overall, just in my opinion. For instance, there's like 5 kids, if I'm not mistaken. There might be 6, I'm not sure. But there's a lot of kids in this movie that all have their own fleshed out characters in the book. And the film tries to have all these kids in the movie and tries to flesh them out. But it's just too much to work with. Like, there's like 5 or 6 kids, and the movie really wants to try and give all of them depth, but it just comes off as like lazy and rushed at the end of the day, because it's an hour 40-minute movie and you want to flesh out 5 kid characters, and it's not going to work very well. And Henry Bauer's character, the fucking psychotic bully who hates fat kids for some reason, his character in this movie was very bland, one-dimensional, and the acting wasn't very good either. I was not fond of his character really at all throughout this entire movie. He just comes off as this psychotic kid with really bad mental issues and hatred for fat kids with really no motivation. He's just, he's psychotic because he's psychotic, and that's it. He has a dad who's like in the law enforcement or something, so I guess that's maybe a hint that, he's like this rebellious psychotic teenager because his dad's a police officer. But his character really wasn't established or fleshed out very well. He was just this psycho kid because he's psycho, and that's it. And again, his acting, I wasn't buying it. He was really got weak actor in this film, and some of the other people that were acting in this movie weren't very good either. But this kind of bridges me to my next negative, which is the fact that throughout this entire movie, I felt like I was just watching a movie. I wasn't immersed into this world in any way, shape, or form. And, sometimes it's not, it's okay. I don't have to be insanely immersed into every single movie that I see. But with horror, I really expect that immersion because I really want to be in there and I want to feel that sense of dread and thrillment throughout the film. And I didn't really get that. For this film, I feel like I was just watching a movie. And that's highly disappointing, in my opinion. And a lot of the effects in this movie are kind of bafflingly bad. Like, I don't know. Like, I was the first scene with Pennywise and Georgie, I thought was fine until it got to the climax of that scene. And the way it was done, like, I don't know. Like, I almost couldn't really believe it. Like, I felt like I was watching, like, a sci-fi original movie. Like, the effects were that cheesy and bad. The CGI was pretty bad. It's not just, like, the beginning scene. Like, throughout this movie, the CGI is very noticeable. And, I don't know, it takes you out. Like, again, it contributes to the fact that I wasn't immersed into this world. And those really cheesy done CGI effects throughout this entire film contributed to that. There's some, uses of practical and prosthetics effects in this movie. And, some of it's alright and some of it's cheesy. Like, some of it didn't really work. Like, I don't know, like, it's fun. Like, even if it's cheesy, yeah, I get it. Like, it's still fun. It's not horrible. But, I don't know. I was expecting more of a real, genuine horror movie because the book, I heard from fans of the book that it's a really horrifying book that, like, oh, it's so scary, like, you won't be able to sleep at night after you read it. But with this movie, it's more fun and cheesy than it is, like, terrifying or serious in any way. Pretty much all of the horror in this movie relies on, like, oh, look at this creepy face. Oh my gosh. Oh, where is it? Oh, is it here? Oh, here's a creepy face. Oh, where's it now? Where is it? Boo, 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 creepy face. Like, throughout the entire movie, it's like that. It's just, it's build up, it's tension, it's building up, and it's always just like, a creepy face. Like, throughout the entire movie. And, it's fine every once in a while, you can do that, but the entire movie kind of relied on that. The entire movie, there's no real creative uses of cinematography to really build up tension, to create dread. It's always just this, like, oh, look at this creepy, distorted face. Isn't that fucking scary? Like, I mean, it's kind of like, yeah, it is kind of creepy to look at it for a second, but it focuses so much on it to where, like, the scare that you might have felt if you only see it for, like, a second, it's gone. Like, it's just gone because it relied solely on the creepy face. And a lot of them were cheesy. Again, like, a lot of them were just, like, this weird, like, prosthetic face that was really zoomed in and shined on, which, okay, by the way, I'm gonna get into another negative, which is the fact that this movie's lit very brightly. This is a very brightly lit movie for the most part. There's some scenes that, go into more darker elements. And in horror, usually that's not good. It's not good in creating atmosphere, and it's also bad for any kind of effects that you want to do, including CGI and prosthetic. Like, those things are much more convincing and much more scarier when they're not displayed in these huge bright lights. I don't know, I just wanted to see more creative uses of the cinematography in this movie. The sound design was good enough and creative enough for me to give it a pass, but the cinematography was just, it was lacking. There was no real creative vision behind it, and especially with the horror genre. Cinematography, in my honest opinion, is one of the most important things when it comes to the horror genre, and this film really lacked that aspect. And what it really boils down to is that this is really like just like a spectacle, like kind of like B-movie horror. And I know this is probably gonna offend a lot of people, but that's kind of the vibe that I ultimately got for it. Like, it's not shot like a B-grade movie. It's shot well, but it's, in terms of it being spectacle, it has the same attributes as a B movie in terms of being like, oh, look at this face, or like, oh, look at these prosthetics, or oh, look at these effects. Like, it all has to do with the effects and prosthetics. It has nothing to do, like, the film isn't scary in any way, but it was trying to be scary in only the practice of spectacle. It wasn't trying to be scary in any other way besides the, ooh, look at that creepy face throughout the entire movie. And some of it, again, was done right, some of it fell flat, but it just gets repetitive and kind of annoying. I want to see more vision behind this, and I didn't really get that. It sucks because that's what I feared going into this movie, because of the trailer kind of gave me that impression. And again, it's poor production history kind of gave me the feeling that this was going to lack a very subtle creative vision, and this was more, again, this Hollywood spectacle horror movie, and I was kind of let down by it in a lot of different ways. One smart, intelligent thing that I thought this film did do was, remember in the trailer, I know you've seen the trailer, we've seen this fucking trailer like a billion times, so the scene where Billy, the main character, is drawing the girl character on a sketch pad, and you see like the drop of blood just drop on top of the sketch paper. Like, that's actually a smart moment, because that actually is like a foreshadowing moment for something that happens near the end of the movie. And I was like, oh, wow, that's smart. You actually did something that I could see. Like, wow, you put effort, and you thought about that for a while, and you said that was a good idea, and you went for it. That was a vision. I wanted more of that. That was a vision that I saw. I was like, okay, that was smart. I can appreciate that. But there wasn't really much of that in this movie, and I guarantee you that aspect of the movie that I thought was smart was probably Cary Fukunaga's script, and we just got a little taste of what he would have done, which, again, was upsetting. I really wish this film was just written and directed by Cary Fukunaga like it was supposed to be, and I guarantee you we would have had a much better film. But again, it doesn't even matter, because I'm in the minority in this. Everybody else that I've really talked to, well, not everybody, but most people that I've talked to have been really digging this movie, and even critics have been really digging this movie. So everybody likes it. So hey, more power to you. Y'all like it. Y'all got the movie that y'all wanted. That's great. I unfortunately didn't get the movie that I wanted, which was upsetting, but that's all right. I saw Annabelle Creation, which is a horror movie about a doll, and that movie was more thrilling and horrifying than a Stephen King adaptation, which, it's kind of a bummer. Like, it is. Stephen King, everybody calls him the king of horror, yet I was more scared about a generic horror movie about a doll than an adaptation from Stephen King. I don't know. I don't know what you want to do with that information, but that's there for you. But listen, despite all the negative things that I said about it, I still think that it was enjoyable. It's not horrible. It's not a bad movie. It's just, I found it to be average for the most part. It has some pretty redeeming aspects of the film. There are parts of it that I thought were done well, and it ultimately did give me a somewhat enjoyable experience. So even though I said all these negative things, I'm still going to give Stephen King's It a B-. It wasn't really as bad as I thought it was going to be, but it definitely really wasn't great. Now, what I'm really looking forward to and excited to see is Darren Aronofsky's Mother next week. That's a guy who's got some vision. That's a guy who really knows how to utilize all aspects of filmmaking to create a very thrilling and artistically creative product, and I'm really excited for it. So be on the lookout for that review next week, and thank you so much for watching. And if you liked my review, make sure to give it a thumbs up and share it amongst your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to the Misfit Pawn channel to be updated on more film related content.